Good afternoon. My name is Lindsay Kabatsky, and I'm the Government Affairs Coordinator at National PTA. We are glad everyone is joining us for this webinar, A Parent's Role in ESSA Implementation. The webinar will feature PTA leaders who will share their stories of being involved in the implementation process of the Every Student Succeeds Act. In addition, Jessa Walker from the Council of Chief State School Officers will talk a bit about how different state education leaders are involving parents in the implementation process. The webinar will begin with a brief overview of ESSA and federal family engagement provisions by Jackie Ball, Director of Government Affairs at National PTA. Everyone is currently muted but can ask questions through the question box on your screen, which we will answer via email after the webinar. If you have questions in the future, you can also send us an email to governmentaffairs@pta.org. That's govtaffairs@pta.org. So we will first begin with an overview of the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, and the transition from NCLB to ESSA. Then we will talk about the family engagement provisions and requirements to involve different stakeholders in the process. Finally, we will have Jessa and two PTA leaders talk about how they have been involved in the process. We will conclude with the highlighting of some resources you can use in your district and state around ESSA. I will now turn it over to Jackie Ball, the Director of Government Affairs at National PTA, to talk briefly about the Every Student Succeeds Act and specific provisions in the new law.
Thank you, Lindsay. The first and most important job of National PTA in ESSA implementation is to help educate and empower parents to be active participants in this process. That is why we are so excited to have you join us today for this webinar on a parent's role in ESSA implementation. The Every Student Succeeds Act, or as it is called, ESSA, was signed into law on December 10, 2015. It reauthorized the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, or ESSA, which was most recently known as No Child Left Behind, or NCLB. This was a long overdue reauthorization that was 8 years in the making. Students, parents, and educators have been waiting since 2007 for an updated version of the law. ESSA provides less of a top-down prescriptive role from the federal government than NCLB. However, with this great opportunity for flexibility comes great responsibility to ensure all students have access to and obtain a high-quality education. The goal of ESSA is to make sure accountability systems and education programs provide the necessary supports, interventions, and resources to students and schools based on their unique needs. The titles of the bill are like chapters of a book and cover various aspects of education, such as programs and supports for high-needs school districts and schools in Title I, professional development for teachers and principals in Title II, English language learners in Title III, 21st century schools in Title IV, and Indian, Native Hawaiian, and Alaska Native education in Title VI, to name a few. Titles 1 and 4 contain most of the family engagement provisions we will discuss later in this webinar. ESSA is now in its implementation phase, which means the federal agency responsible for implementing the law, the U.S. Department of Education, is providing information and resources to states on how to comply with the law. The U.S. Department of Education is providing frequently asked questions documents, issuing proposed regulations that allow for interested parties to comment on them before they become final, and guidance and technical assistance materials to help states and school districts carry out the new law. Proposed regulations are rules regarding the implementation of specific aspects of the law. For example, the department has issued proposed regulations on requirements within state plans, state accountability systems, and state and local report cards. The public comment period for these proposed regulations is open until August 1st, 2016. Additionally, the department also has proposed regulations on state assessments required under Title I that are open for comment until September 9th, 2016. As you also see on the slide, the department released guidance on improving educational stability and outcomes for students in foster care under ESSA, and just today released guidance on homeless children and youth as well. You can access these materials and other information on ESSA via the department's webpage at ed.gov/ESSA. Since states and school districts are moving from one law, NCLB, to a new law, ESSA, I wanted to take a few minutes to highlight some of the key transitions that are occurring. Under ESSA, the ESSA flexibility waivers from No Child Left Behind expire on August 1st, 2016, as do the current state accountability systems under NCLB. While current state accountability systems expire in a few short days, schools that were identified as priority or focus schools under NCLB must continue to receive supports and interventions in the upcoming school year. States must work with stakeholders such as parents over the coming year to design new accountability systems under ESSA to be in place for the 2017-2018 school year. Formula grant funds, such as Title I, for school year 2016-2017 will be allocated according to the same formula as the previous school year. Competitive grant programs under ESSA, such as the statewide family engagement centers, will go into effect on October 1st, 2016, as long as they receive funding through the federal appropriations process. State and local report cards must continue to be published based on the requirements under NCLB, except for those no longer required under ESSA, such as adequate yearly progress, or AYP. States and school districts must continue to provide information to parents in the community regarding student achievement on statewide assessments for all students and subgroups of students. Now we'd like to discuss what ESSA means for your child in various aspects of their education. ESSA reduces the reliance on high-stakes testing by requiring states to use multiple measures of student achievement and progress in their accountability systems. ESSA eliminates adequate yearly progress, or AYP, and the annual measurable objectives, AMOs, required under NCLB. In addition to the traditional subjects of math, reading, and science, ESSA broadens the definition of a well-rounded education to include access to courses, activities, and programming in science, technology, engineering, foreign languages, civics and government, economics, arts, history, geography, computer science, music, career and technical education, health, physical education, and any other subject determined by the state or school district to provide all students with an enriched educational experience. Now, what does ESSA mean for your child's teachers? Teacher and principal evaluation systems tied to student assessments were required in order to receive an ESSA flexibility waiver under No Child Left Behind. The new law does not require states to establish teacher evaluation systems, nor that a teacher evaluation system includes student test scores. States have the flexibility to create teacher evaluation systems, if they choose, that best meet the needs of educators and students in their states. Let's talk about the testing requirements within ESSA. The annual assessment requirements in ESSA mirror the responsibilities under NCLB. Students must be assessed in math and reading every year in grades 3 through 8 and once in grades 9 through 12. Additionally, ESSA also requires grade-span science assessments similar to NCLB. Results from student assessments will also be disaggregated by student subgroups such as race, ethnicity, low-income status, students with disabilities, English language learners, gender, and migrant status, which was also required under NCLB. ESSA also maintains the requirement from NCLB that 95% of all students and subgroups of students must participate in the federally required state assessments. However, Under ESSA, states determine how to factor student participation rates into their accountability systems. What does ESSA say about your child's progress and achievement? States must adopt challenging state academic standards in math, reading, science, and any other subject as determined by the state. States must also establish ambitious, state-designed long-term goals, which shall include measurements of interim progress towards meeting those goals for all students and subgroups of students. Lastly, states must develop accountability systems that use multiple measures of student growth and achievement. So what are these multiple measures of student achievement, and what does that mean for your child's school accountability system? State accountability systems must include multiple measures of student achievement. The law requires state accountability systems to include, at a minimum, student academic achievement on annual assessments in math, reading, and science, another academic indicator, such as student growth, or another statewide measure of student learning in elementary and middle school, or graduation rates in high school, English language proficiency, and at least one additional indicator of school quality or student success. Let's take a look at possible indicators of school quality or student success on the next slide. Within ESSA, a few examples of school quality and student success indicators are provided, such as student and educator engagement, student access to and completion of advanced coursework, school climate and safety, and attendance. The school quality and student success indicator must allow for meaningful differentiation of school performance, be valid, reliable, comparable, and measured across the state. States can include more than one additional indicator of school quality or student success in their accountability system. For example, Connecticut's Next Generation Accountability System has several school quality and student success indicators. A few of them are rates of chronic absenteeism, post-secondary enrollment, physical fitness, and arts access. So what if your child's school is not performing up to the state's standards? ESSA requires that states must identify and provide support and interventions for the lowest performing 5% of all Title I schools, those who fail to graduate more than a third of their students, and Title I schools with low performing subgroups of students. Parents must be involved in the development and implementation of school improvement plans for those schools identified. This is essential as parents are a key component of school improvement efforts. This leads us to our next portion of the webinar, an overview of several key family engagement provisions in ESSA. In the next few slides, I'd like to highlight several provisions regarding parents and families as key stakeholders in ESSA implementation and family engagement policies. As you see here, there are several requirements for parental involvement in ESSA. Parents are required stakeholders in the development of state and local education plans, and schools must involve parents in school improvement plans for those schools who are identified for additional support and interventions. Also, state and local report cards must be developed with parental input and be provided in an understandable format, accessible, and actionable to parents. Parents must also be consulted in the development of state and local plans for teacher and principal professional development under Title II, English language learners in Title III, student support and academic enrichment grants, and the 21st Century Community Learning Centers in Title IV. As mentioned previously, the two main titles that contain family engagement provisions are Title I and Title IV. National PTA advocated vigorously for the inclusion of these two sections along with increased stakeholder engagement provisions during the reauthorization of ESSA. Title I requires a written parent and family engagement policy for Title I school districts and schools. Under ESSA, school districts are required to reserve 1% of their Title IA funds for family engagement. Not less than 90% of these funds must be used at the school level, with priority going to high-need schools. 10% of those funds can be used for district-wide family engagement strategies and activities. ESSA also requires that Title I funds for family engagement must be used on at least one of the 5 activities listed. Professional development on family engagement, which can be provided jointly to teachers, principals, other school leaders, specialized instructional support personnel, paraprofessionals, early childhood educators, and parents and family members. Funds can also be used for home visiting, sharing best practices focused on family or parent and family engagement, especially those practices for increasing the engagement of economically disadvantaged parents and family members, collaborating with other organizations with a record of success in improving and increasing parent and family engagement, and finally, other activities and strategies consistent with the school district family engagement policy. One of the few standalone programs that remains from NCLB is the statewide family engagement centers. Title IV, Part E, authorizes the statewide family engagement centers competitive grant program. This program was formerly the Parental Information and Resource Centers, or PIRCs, under NCLB. The program is authorized at $10 million in ESSA. Unfortunately, the program has not been funded in either the House or Senate Labor, Health, and Education appropriations bills. However, it is a key priority of National PTA to secure funding for this important grant program. We will continue to push Congress to fund this program over the coming months. Statewide family engagement centers have 3 core functions to strengthen family engagement and family-school partnerships that promote student achievement and school improvement efforts. They are working with state and local level agencies to support systemic family engagement initiatives in schools and school districts, delivering professional development on evidence-based and effective family engagement strategies to schools, districts, and educators, and providing direct services to families on how to effectively work with their child's school and teachers. As we transition to our panelists, I wanted to highlight the required participants in the development of state and local plans, education plans. As you can see, the law requires a diverse set of stakeholders to help inform and design educational systems that will benefit all students. As consumers of our nation's public schools, it is imperative that parents are involved at the onset in the implementation of ESSA. Before we hear from our panelists on their perspectives of ESSA implementation, let's review the key areas under ESSA in which parents must be meaningfully consulted. Under ESSA, parents are required to be consulted in the following areas: state and local Title I plans, Title II state and local applications for teacher and principal professional development, Title III state and local plans for English language learners, Title IVA local applications for the student support and academic enrichment grants, and Title IVB state applications for the 21st Century Community Learning Centers, as well as state and local report cards and school improvement plans. Now I'd like to turn it back over to Lindsay Kabatsky, National PTA Government Affairs Coordinator.
Thanks, Jackie. So our first panelist is Jessa Walker. She is the Senior Federal Relations Associate at the Council of Chief State School Officers. The Council of Chief State School Officers, or CCSSO, is a nonpartisan, nationwide, nonprofit organization of public officials who head departments of elementary and secondary education in states and around the country. Jessa can give a state leader perspective of ESSA implementation and how they might engage in stakeholders in the implementation process. Jessa, how is CCSSO working with states to support stakeholder engagement, and how do you see this process going forward?
Thank you, Lindsay. First, I want to thank my friends at National PTA for being true partners in supporting the successful implementation of ESSA. We have been coordinating, sharing ideas, advocating for a better law, and holding each other accountable since well before ESSA was passed last year. I'm grateful for this partnership because chiefs cannot be successful in improving outcomes for all kids without input from and the support of parents. I want to share a little about what CCSSO is doing to support states in implementing the new law. You should know that any resources I mention are available on our website at ccsso.org/ESSA. As you've heard today, and I'm sure in many of your conversations about this new law, ESSA provides increased opportunity for states to create the education systems they want for their kids. Along with this increased flexibility comes great responsibility for states to get it right. We at CCSSO have encouraged states to be methodical about their thinking about how to implement ESSA. Well before any draft regulations were released, we pushed states to reach out to stakeholders early and often to start to get feedback on what the state, and here I'm referring not to the SEA or the chief, but to the entire state, what the state sees as their vision for the type of education system and experiences they want for their kids. We provided resources for states to think about their state strategic vision and encouraged them to move from the compliance-driven No Child Left Behind to a system where their vision, as in what they want to see different for their states in 3 to 5 years, drives every decision made in ESSA implementation. After setting a state vision, we identified 7 buckets or critical areas where we thought states would need to spend some additional time considering whether and how to change their systems. These areas include accountability, assessments, supports for English language learners, and so on. We provided information to states on what ESSA requires in each of these areas, as well as the opportunities states have to make changes. All of this information is also available on our website. Early last month, after weeks of consultation with 15 national civil rights groups and organizations that represent key constituencies, including National PTA, we released our Stakeholder Engagement Guide, the link for which is available on the slide and also on our website. This guide provides detailed step-by-step suggestions for how to solicit and build on meaningful and authentic stakeholder engagement. There are also specific suggestions for how to engage different communities, including tribal communities, students with disabilities, and of course, parents. We are particularly proud of this guide and of how states are adopting the suggestions we laid out. Now that said, I will not pretend that all states have overnight become expert in stakeholder engagement. And this is an area where I lean a lot on my colleagues at PTA. We fully expect that if parents, for example, feel left out of the process in their state, the PTA will let us know so we can work with that state to do better. Likewise, we want to hear from you all about what your state is doing well, so we can hold that state up as a model for others. Ultimately, the measure of state success in implementing this new law will be whether stakeholders throughout the state feel as though their suggestions and concerns have been acknowledged and addressed in the new state systems, and more importantly, whether new state plans move the ball for kids. Thank you again for this opportunity to join you today, and I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you, Jessa. And we'll now turn it over to Kelly Langston. Kelly is the president of North Carolina PTA, where she has been active for many years at all levels. She will give us some insight into what's going on in North Carolina with the Every Student Succeeds Act. Kelly, how is the Every Student Succeeds Act playing out in North Carolina, and how are you involved?
Sure, thank you. And hi, everyone. I appreciate this opportunity to be on the call today. I'm very passionate about family engagement and thrilled to see parents really highlighted once again by decision makers for calling on us to be really part of the input. And it's so exciting to hear it really emphasized that that parent input is critical from the very beginning. So in North Carolina, I'm very excited to share what we're doing here. And I think for me, my involvement has really been from my role at PTA and the information that I've received from National, the right questions to ask, what to look for, and knowing when and where I can engage. So that's been really exciting to have the tools and the resources on the National PTA website. That's helped a lot as a parent in a state trying to give meaningful input. So really, from some of the roles that I have in North Carolina, I've been fortunate enough to be part of seeing different presentations from the Director of Data Research and Federal Policy here in North Carolina. Our state superintendent has a parent advisory council, and parents from across the state come, and she had the Director of Federal Policy present really what was happening, kind of give a lay of land, and then seek input. So that was one opportunity, and then some of the other education kind of collaboratives, they also have had the opportunity to hear kind of the same presentation. So fortunately, I've heard it a couple of times, and I'm a processor, so there are many opportunities to ask questions and to get involved in that sense. And there are also regional meetings throughout the state, and the timeline's been very clear in North Carolina when different things would be happening. So those regional public comment sessions happened in like April and May, and that's really when also there was a lot of outreach to different groups to present, including the Parent Advisory Council, and that was a great opportunity for parents to be together, just a group of parents, because oftentimes when it's one parent, one token parent in the group, we don't always know the right questions to ask or may not feel comfortable asking the questions, so it was nice having just a group of parents so that we could really speak off of one another too. So that was, I think, one of the most positive experiences for me. And so I'm just one person though, and I fully recognize that I don't have the parent voice for all the communities across North Carolina. So at North Carolina PTA, we try really hard to, when we know about the public comment series going across the different regions, that we encourage the PTA leaders to reach out in their communities and find parents to support in attending. PTA can be a great convener of the parent voice. We're a trusted resource. We know that we know who the leaders, the thought leaders are in those communities, and who the respected folks are and who feels comfortable. So we really try to encourage by just providing information and encouragement and empowerment, so parents show up at those regional meetings freely and giving their opinions and their input, sharing that, and feeling empowered, and then learning again about the process. When parents are meaningfully engaged, it's an awareness sharing too, so the outcomes are always going to be better. And that's really my experience here, and all the inputs really being compiled right now, and then there'll be the draft plan, which they're working on this summer, and then there'll be more input in the fall before they draft the final plan. So thanks again for letting me share the great things that are happening in North Carolina.
Great. Thank you, Kelly, for that insight, and we look forward to talking with you a little bit more about it. Next, we'll have Otto Schell. Otto is from the Oregon PTA and is the legislative director there, and he's been advocating on behalf of families and students for many years. Otto, what can you tell us about your experience so far with this new law?
Well, hello, Lindsay, and good morning from Portland, Oregon. I can tell you that, first thing out, I've been at it long enough to know what it felt like when the conversations around No Child Left Behind were being spooled up, and I have to say the parent engagement portion of that was very thin, and I'm thankful that National PTA and the states are really working harder to engage. I think our complaints about NCLB influenced how ESSA was formed and where the opportunities are for parents to weigh in. In Oregon, we've actually launched fairly quickly out of the box. Congresswoman Bonamici from Northwest Oregon had an early meeting to kind of give the lay of the land and give a heads up to us about ESSA, included parents and other coalition partners, and then they launched into a series of statewide or regional town hall forums. They had 13 forums that were conducted under the banner of the Oregon Department of Education, and because we did this webinar, you have given me a huge and wonderful opportunity to have several deep conversations with the Department of Ed and to find out what's going on. They report that 850 Oregonians, comprised of educators, parents, higher ed representatives, students, and business reps, attended those initial town halls. They also created 4 work groups comprised of about 150 people spread out over work groups that are standards and assessments, educator effectiveness, school improvement, and an accountability kind of subject area. Those work groups, those 150 people, which were heavily populated by teachers, educators, other administrators, and kind of the implementers, with some parents in that mix, had 4 different day-long meetings, which of course from the parent community is very tricky to pull off a day-long, 4 times day-long meeting. But we did feel, and Oregon PTA had good representation there, and we also felt like our comments were heard and received. In addition to that, the Department of Ed has set up and is taking comments both electronically but through a variety of different portals, I guess. Now, I will say that the great news is that they've had at least a moment to reflect on all that information they gathered. They did an interesting thing of doing a word search on, they had about 2,000 words and phrases that kept percolating up through the conversation. So they're digesting that and trying to inform the work going forward. Some of the themes that were kind of frequently brought up were the need for rigorous, relevant, and well-rounded engaging experiences for all students, the focus on relationships early on. You know, many parents know that relationship with the teacher and other adults in the building really changed magically for kids, the outcome. There was an emphasis in the conversations about personalizing and individualizing learning, and then, not surprisingly, an embrace for the need for equity, more than just saying it out loud, but to actually develop plans and implementation strategies that would bring that quality to every kid. The one thing that came up over and over, and I think the Department of Ed learned early on, is if you're too technical in your presentation, the parents really will check out. They did find that the parent response was a real focus on that they wanted a safe and inviting place for kids to come, not unlike what we hear frequently, you know, when we go out to talk to local unit PTAs. And then they wanted to see that the staff was given all the tools and support to get the job done. In tight budget times, that's quite challenging. And then there was a recognition that we actually need to get busy about investing in smaller class size, you know, kind of the CTE-oriented instruction, programs that don't just come and go with the vagaries of a budget. You know, that feedback coming back through the parents and through the teachers in particular has been a real positive thing in Oregon. So I should pause there and see if Lindsay has anything else for me.
Great, thank you, Otto. And I'll now turn it over to Jackie Ball to ask each of you a few questions about your experiences.
Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you so much to Jessa, Kelly, and Otto for your time today and sharing your perspectives and experiences around ESSA implementation. We're so honored to have you all join this webinar today, so thank you for that. Jessa, I'd like to start with you first. Since the bulk of ESSA implementation is occurring at the state level right now, can you share with attendees on the webinar the role of just sort of a general overview of what the role of the state chief or state superintendent of education in this process is?
Sure, thank you, Jackie. As I mentioned earlier, we really see the role of the chief in these still early months of implementation as working with stakeholders to get a vision, to set a vision for their state and to seek input on how people in their state think they can improve or change their current systems or practices. I really like what Otto just had to say about the level, the grain size really that a lot of parents are engaging at. And while the chiefs and SEA staff are going to have to engage in the details sooner rather than later, now is a really good time to get feedback, no matter how broad, from parents. And I think that a lot of parents have those specific comments about what they want their schools to feel like and the experiences they want for their kids. And it's important to make sure that we have that all at top of mind as we dig into the specifics about what goes into the accountability systems and so on. So I think that right now chiefs are really trying to get a lot of that feedback so that they can drill in knowing that they are on the same path that parents want them to be set on.
Thank you, Jessa. I wanted to follow up on that. Is there anything in particular that you think state chiefs would like to hear from parents? I know you talked about broad feedback, and Otto talked about making sure that technical presentations are kept to a minimum for parents and families, but is there anything you're hearing from state chiefs that they really want to know from parents?
Well, that's a really good question, Jackie. Right now, I think that, well, I should say that there isn't a simple answer to that. States are all in different places right now. And I had a call earlier this week with about 20 states, and just to check in to see where they are in their implementation process. Some states are still developing their plan for stakeholder engagement to start that process. Other states have completed the first round of town halls around the state and have already drafted state plans, and now are looking for ways to get feedback on that. So it really does vary state by state. That said, I think that there are some states have really shown have really great models, and I think Oregon's a great example of this, where the chief isn't going out and asking specific questions about what accountability indicators they should include in their system, but they're asking, what do you want to see happen in your schools, and how can we support that work moving forward? And I think that those are the questions that parents are especially able to answer at this point, and chiefs want that feedback.
Great, thank you, Jessa. Oh, go ahead.
And just to expand on that, in Oregon, the one thing I would say is that there is a recognition, too, that they still haven't reached a significant swath of those parents. A lot of parents just don't make the connection between this federal law and their classroom. And I'm reminded when NCLB started rolling out, we had to really help parents understand this is a federal law, and it impacts what the instruction looks like in your kid's classroom. So I do think there's a huge opportunity for PTA. The other feedback I got from the people at the Department of Ed, and to their credit, they're sending out their the highest level staff to these town halls to hear directly. But the one thing that I heard is that there are some states where they had already had really good relationships with their PTAs and with with other coalition members. So they were a little further ahead, and I see that as a huge opportunity for PTA to use this ESSA work to give parents a better connection and a relationship with the implementers, because it's going to be a long time in being rolled out.
Great, thank you, Otto. Otto, I wanted to follow up. You had mentioned the regional town halls that the Oregon State Department of Education has been holding. I wanted you to maybe share a little bit more about how Oregon is engaging parents in ESSA implementation in addition to the town halls. Are there any other activities or events or information that they're providing to parents and families on ESSA implementation in the state?
Yes, I mean, I'm happy to say it's all evolving, and again, because of this webinar, it was a great excuse to get the most current information. They have a PowerPoint kind of driven presentation that they're going to put up soon. When it's in its final form, I would love to share that with you all as National PTA sees fit, because it kind of gets after what the initial findings are, and then a recognition of what they need to do better. And then that's around, in Oregon, we actually have tribal schools that sometimes are not always as well engaged. They are not as well connected to the conversation. There's definitely an interest by the tribes to do better and to connect with the state implementation process. And again, not a surprise, because many states struggle with, but the families that are frequently in the schools that are historically underserved, there is just again difficulty making that connection. So they're coming back with another round of outreach. We're hoping that we'll be able to loop that into our back to school end of summer training camps in PTA. And then we hope that they will use us as a, both with social media, but, the various modern kind of tech-driven ways to do outreach. We know that some of those things will get to different audiences, but we also probably need to develop a strategy about personal asks for people to be involved, particularly at the schools that don't feel like they've been listened to for a long time.
Great, thank you, Otto. Kelly, could you share with us your thoughts on how states and school districts can get more parent voice and input throughout the ESSA implementation process? And Otto just touched on specific outreach to particular communities. So how can the average parent be included in the process given the parents and families' limited time and the complexity of the new law?
That's a great question, Jackie, and I think that's a question that a lot of our states are asking, and I know North Carolina is as well. They have a lot of resources on the website. You could pull up more information and you could read. They've got a Let's Talk link. There's a lot of, but it's almost formalized, and it's hard for which is that's a great starting place. But when you really want parent engagement, like you said, it's really at that that level of parent giving input in their community, and the time and the responsibility, but also the know-how, like who do I speak with? And parents oftentimes don't even know that they are such a valuable resource. So just unlocking that as well. So I think, as you guys already mentioned, really being strategic in how do we ask in our community. So it's not just this blanket statewide ask, but it's really leaders in the community asking parents in that community. So I think it's going to be teachers having to ask parents, and it's going to be principal administrators reaching out. I had a parent call me yesterday so excited that they served on their district level PTA, and they were asked to serve on a team for ESSA implementation. They were so excited, and I think parents I really believe parents want to be asked, but we oftentimes don't know that we even have that valuable information to share. So I know I'm kind of rambling the answer, but I think it's important that somebody asks parents, someone that the parent trusts and believes, when they're asked, we want your input, I think you have a valuable information to share, and then also making sure that's a positive experience for the parent, that their information is received in a positive manner, and that they are not just asked to approve something that's already done, but that they really are asked for input in the whole process. Because I think parents can really tell the difference when you're asking for them to just give your blessing out of requirement on something that you really already done, and the difference in being organically asked from the beginning, what do you think, and what are your thoughts, and why do you feel that way, and how can we better serve, and how can we make this clearer? So I think that's a really great question that we all struggle with. How do we get parents involved? But I think it's when we have to constantly reevaluate and make sure that the asks are personal, so that parents feel really valued and like they really do have that great potential that we know they do.
Jackie, may I follow up on something Kelly just said?
Absolutely.
Kelly, I loved what you just said, especially about how parents know when they are being asked to sign off on something versus being asked what they think, and having that be used in forming a new idea or a new path. And that's something that we really try to stress in our stakeholder engagement guide as well for states, is to really start engaging all stakeholders early in the process before you have something on the table. So you're not just asking people to respond to a plan you've already drafted, but really asking what matters to each of these stakeholders, using that information in an authentic way to draft something, and then continuing to have these conversations through the process, not just once at the front end and once at the back end, and reminding folks that a meeting at the state capitol is not stakeholder engagement. And so really needing to get out into the community often, frequently, and continuing to get that support and that feedback. And then knowing that once ESSA is implemented, that should not be the end of this process either. That this is an opportunity to develop new relationships perhaps in states that haven't already done that, but that these relationships with parents, with teachers, with tribal communities, that these can be really productive relationships moving well into the future.
The other thing that came up in Oregon was that there was a decent turnout from students, particularly the FFA, the Future Farmers of America group, which is not just about farms anymore. They were really organized and showed up in a large number of the town halls to give a student voice. The other thing that I see is that there's a huge opportunity for parents through PTA and you know, perhaps individually to both push and tell the Department of Ed, for example, in our circumstance, we got your back on this. You need to push the feds on making sure that flexibility and innovation are honored, that that teachers are allowed to do the things that they know work for our students. And it's on, in my mind, all the time when we have these adult-to-adult conversations. From the parent perspective, we should just keep saying it. How does this serve the kid? Because, you know, sometimes we're talking about all those intricacies and deadlines, and really, from the parent perspective is, you know, I want to know how this is helping my kid learn. And then, like in the particular instance of the report cards, we keep, you know, mashing around the information on the report card. You should really be talking to the parents. What's meaningful? You know, a lot of times that it doesn't feel, that I think there's missed opportunities, and I'm hoping in Oregon that we'll be able to use that parent voice to say, we've got your back, but you also, you know, you, the implementers, need to push so they have that flexibility to not have it always be punishing. For example, the lower performing schools, shaming and blaming never seems to improve outcomes. It really, there has to be a different approach. So I see real positive opportunities there, but I also see a lot of work for parents too.
Otto, you mentioned something just now in your remarks, so I'd like to actually skip to a question around report cards. As we talked about in the webinar, ESSA does require states and school districts to publicly disseminate an annual report card that is developed in consultation with parents. So I first wanted to ask Jessa, you know, how are states planning to engage, or have states already done any work in this area to engage parents on developing the state report cards? And then I'll follow up with Kelly and Otto on some suggestions from their perspective as parents.
Yeah, I really appreciate this question because we are getting the same question from states as well. Really wondering what is the best way to engage parents on this, on the issue of state report cards, and how do they you know, develop something that's new, that provides information that the parents need, as well as the information that educators need. And so this is an area that actually we've reached out to National PTA on, and we're hoping to sit down and have a conversation with you guys about how best for states to engage parents on this issue. So I really would love to hear from the other panelists, and then this is definitely an area where I'm going to be following up with Jackie to provide some best practices, some support to states in how they are going to take on this work.
Great. So Otto and Kelly, are there suggestions that maybe you all have right now that you could share with Jessa and the audience around making state and local report cards more informative and actionable to parents in the community?
Kelly, you're welcome to go. And
Sure. So I think it's important. This is a great example where parent engagement early on is critical, because it will form the way, obviously, the report card is presented, but it will also be more meaningful when the parent receives it if they understand the whole process and they felt engaged in that. And I say that because if you ask 100 parents what they want to see, you're going to get almost 100 different answers. So I think for me, it's something I just want to know my school is doing well, but a lot of times parents don't really, if it's not doing well, okay, what does that mean, and what are we going to do about it? Not necessarily, as you mentioned, that doom and gloom, and that's not productive at all. So engaging parents early in that and having it in a format where it's very a quick, easy read, whether the school is doing well, but then again, what does well mean? So that needs to be defined as also, and then being transparent with all the information kind of after that. So it's as much, you can get a parent as much information as they need, but then also where to find additional information, how to get involved, how to be part of the solution, how to be a meaningful stakeholder in our kids' education. So there's got to be, it's an opportunity for future engagement as well. So I think we have to look at that. I know that's kind of overwhelming to think of it like that, but when it's just a piece of paper with all of this information in a very statistical manner, sometimes it just isn't meaningful, and we've missed an opportunity to engage parents in future work for the school. So I would say make it easy for the folks that just want a quick, but then also making sure that there's additional information, and also making sure that there's don't miss that opportunity for future engagement with parents.
I echo those concerns, and I think that in the discussions that we've heard thus far in Oregon, there is a recognition that low performance on test scores, or high performance for that matter, alone are not, that doesn't make a school. There were interesting conversations in my school improvement work group around telling a broader story about educator quality and effectiveness. There was a conversation in that group, and also when we merged together with some of the other work groups to have kind of a big room discussion about putting in what might be considered more subjective information about the school. So to tell a little bit more of the story, how you make that into a statewide, easy to compare document, I don't know. I do know that Oregon only recently, a few years back, reworked its state report card, and it was received with kind of a shrug in many parts of the community. They were working hard to try to make it more relevant, but it didn't really tell much more than test results, and that was a challenge. The other thing is that looking for like the multiple measures, do you have, we have before and after, it's called Sun Schools. Does your school have a Sun School? Do you have these enrichment opportunities for kids? Are there kids that, go on to do these amazing things that come through your program? There's got to be a way to kind of reveal some of that information. I think it depends on what that report card's being used for. And then I do respect that one thing that the federal legislation is trying to keep is a focus on you and those schools need to know who your kids are, and you need to know where they are in the learning process. You need to know what happens to them. So that we've had conversations about success rate after graduation. How do you quantify that? How do you plug it in? Those are real tricky, but most parents will know anecdotally that information, in your community. So I see opportunities there. No small task to make it shareable or comparable.
Well, thank you, Otto, and thank you, Jessa and Kelly, for your comments. I really, look forward to hearing more from our PTAs and parents in the field about report cards and some not only the information that they want to see on them, but best practices around state and local report cards, and then also working with you, Jessa, and CCSO on providing solid recommendations for states and districts to make sure that report cards are providing quality information for parents in the community about students and their schools and the district. So thank you all for that. I do want to end on one last question that's kind of broad and then tie up our webinar here, but as you're all aware, and I'm sure a lot of the attendees on this webinar, there was a lot of excitement around ESSA when it was passed, that it provided a great opportunity for states and districts to really meet the unique needs of their states and communities. So I wanted to see from your all's perspective, based on your work in ESSA is what is your greatest hope for ESSA? And I know that's kind of broad in general, but really to end on that piece of what really is your greatest hope for this new law from your perspective as Jessa with the Council of Chief State School Officers, and Kelly and Otto from your perspective as parents and PTA leaders.
That's such a great question, and I'm glad you asked it, Jackie. For us, if nothing else, we really think that this new law is a fresh start and a reason for people to get excited about education again. As Otto was mentioning earlier, and Kelly as well, NCLB was such a downer. While there were important aspects of the law, including increased transparency, the habit of labeling schools as failing, which really was labeling communities as failing, was not productive in helping students, parents, and teachers to feel excited about being in those schools every day. So we really see this as an opportunity right now to get excited again about education, about our schools, and about those hubs of our communities. And so we're really pressing forward to do whatever we can to maintain that momentum and have people just happy to be there.
Kelly, you go, and I'll take the last.
Sure. I am so excited that this is another opportunity for parents to engage in their child's education. I'm so excited that parents are being recognized as a critical stakeholder. I think there is great potential to let states really own their education plans and to really get down and dirty with the parents and their communities and make this a partnership on really working so every child's potential becomes a reality. And I really see this being a great step forward, and really excited to see what's to come.
And I share that positive opportunity focus, but I also see from a very personal hope from Oregon PTA is I want to raise Oregon PTA's visibility as a parent advocate group and resource for our state. I think that there's a huge opportunity here, and the language of ESSA that is so focused on parents being part of the conversation, we just have to remind them over and over. And rather than have the parents be the ones who show up with the pitchforks and torches when something goes off rails, wouldn't it be nice to be on the front end of building a real positive thing that helps in the classroom?
Great. Thank you so much, Jessa, Otto, and Kelly. And again, I want to thank you all for your time today. It was so wonderful to hear from each of you around your perspectives. As I stated at the beginning of this webinar, National PTA is committed to educating and empowering parents to be active participants in ESSA implementation. And like Otto said, also ensure that PTAs are a resource and a powerful advocate for children across the country. I wanted to point out to all of you the resources that PTA has created and curated on our ESSA webpage, pta.org/ESSA, that are parent-friendly and house, again, numerous resources for parents and families to better understand ESSA and the role that you as a parent can play in it. We have a variety of summaries of titles of the bill, State Department of Education ESSA web pages, a direct link that you can click on to see if your state does have an ESSA web page, and more information about how they are engaging stakeholders in the process. Questions PTA advocates should ask about ESSA implementation. One-pagers on what the new law means for your child, family engagement provisions in ESSA, and the statewide family engagement centers, among numerous other resources, including resources such as the one Jessa mentioned from CCSO. We're proud to work with CCSO and all of our other education partners on the effective implementation of ESSA.
And finally, don't forget that if you have any questions, you can contact us at governmentaffairs@pta.org. That's GOVT affairs@pta.org, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you have or help with the implementation process in your district and state. And don't forget to follow us on social media to get advocacy updates and be the first to know about new parent-friendly resources that we have on our webpage. A recording of this webinar will be found on our YouTube page at youtube.com/nationalpta. And again, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us on this webinar, and especially thanks to Jessa, Kelly, and Otto for sharing their thoughts on the new law. We hope everyone has a great rest of the week.